Behind the towering walls of Great Meadow Correctional Facility lies a hidden truth. A place meant for safety has become a breeding ground for fear, instability, and violence. What happens when a prison designed to protect society cannot protect the people inside it? Great Meadow Correctional Facility, often referred to simply as Comstock, stands as one of New York State's most fortified maximum security institutions, a place where the very architecture reflects the seriousness of the individuals housed inside. When people hear maximum security, they imagine high walls, razor wire, and locked steel doors. But in reality, the term represents a far more intense, structured, and heavily monitored world, and Great Meadow embodies this environment in its most uncompromising form. At its core, a maximum security prison is designed for individuals deemed to pose the highest risk to public safety. Many inmates housed in Great Meadow are serving long or life sentences. Some are repeat offenders and others have histories of extreme violence both inside and outside of prison. This level of security means that every movement within the facility is regulated. Inmates do not simply walk freely from one area to another, they are escorted, counted, controlled, and observed at all times. The prison's daily rhythm is dictated by security protocols, and even the smallest deviation from routine can trigger lockdowns or emergency procedures. The physical structure is intimidating. Towering walls reinforced with multiple layers of razor wire, guard towers equipped with surveillance equipment, and electronic monitoring systems that track movement around the clock. The architecture is meant not only to prevent escapes but to minimize opportunities for violence, contraband exchange, or large-scale disturbances. Every hallway, every yard, every cell block is engineered with angles, camera lines, and barrier points that allow correctional officers to maintain control even during chaotic moments. Inside, steel-barred gates separate units, and heavy sliding doors controlled remotely create controlled compartments, making it possible to isolate entire sections instantly if necessary. But the maximum security environment at Great Meadow is not defined solely by its physical barriers. It is shaped just as much by the psychological atmosphere that those barriers create. The constant noise of metal doors slamming, the echoing footsteps of officers on patrol, the metallic buzz of intercoms, and the ever-present surveillance cultivate a sense of hyper-awareness. Prisoners quickly learn that privacy does not exist. Every word spoken in a cell, every interaction in the yard, every expression on their faces is potentially being observed. This contributes to a heightened level of tension that becomes an inseparable part of daily life. In such a tightly controlled environment, even small infractions carry significant consequences. Something as minor as refusing a direct order, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or engaging in an argument can lead to disciplinary action, sometimes resulting in solitary confinement. Maximum security prisons like Great Meadow rely heavily on segregation units to maintain order. Solitary confinement is often used not only as punishment but as a preventative tool to separate high-risk individuals or defuse potential conflicts before they erupt. Days, weeks, or even months in isolation can profoundly affect mental stability, adding another layer of complexity to an already volatile environment. Routine in Great Meadow is strict by necessity. Inmates wake at designated times, eat meals in controlled settings, attend programs under supervision, and return to their cells according to schedule. Every step, every interaction is monitored. This rigid structure is meant to reduce opportunities for violence, but it also reflects the seriousness of the population. The slightest lapse in attention from staff members could lead to stabbings, gang conflicts, or assaults, events that maximum security prisons experience at higher rates compared to lower-level facilities. Moreover, the prisoner population within maximum security settings tends to be highly stratified and politically charged. In Great Meadow, various groups, sometimes gang-related, sometimes region-based, sometimes formed for protection, operate beneath the surface. These groups influence how inmates interact, how conflicts unfold, and how individuals navigate daily life. In this environment, alliances can be both a lifeline and a liability. A simple misunderstanding can escalate into violence, and even uninvolved inmates can be swept into conflicts they never intended to be part of. The maximum security designation means that nearly everyone within the facility has a history of violence or is capable of committing it under pressure, creating a climate where constant vigilance becomes a survival skill. Correctional officers working in a maximum security environment face their own challenges. Their roles require maintaining order in a place where tension is always simmering. They must balance firmness with professionalism, understanding that any sign of weakness can be exploited while any excessive aggression can inflame the population. Officers operate with the awareness that any shift could bring unexpected danger, An ambush, a sudden fight, or an attack sparked by events that unfolded hours or days earlier. This atmosphere contributes to high stress levels for staff, making their job not only physically demanding but psychologically draining as well. Great Meadow's maximum security environment also shapes the programs available to inmates. While educational and rehabilitative programs exist, they are often heavily supervised, limited by risk assessment, or suspended entirely during periods of heightened security. Movement to classes, workshops, or therapy groups requires careful planning, with officers escorting individuals or groups through multiple security checkpoints. The availability of such programs can fluctuate depending on overall conditions, lockdown frequency, and staffing levels. As a result, rehabilitation opportunities, while present, are significantly constrained by the security priorities of the institution. Overall, the maximum security environment at Great Meadow Correctional Facility creates a world defined by structure, control, and constant tension. It is a place where the architecture enforces authority and the atmosphere reinforces vigilance, where safety is always balanced precariously against the risks inherent in housing some of the state's most challenging individuals. Great Meadow Correctional Facility has long been known, both among inmates and correctional staff, as one of the most volatile prisons in New York State. Its reputation for inmate-on-inmate violence is not just a rumor or a label. It is a living, daily reality that shapes the atmosphere inside its walls. Fights, assaults, and surprise attacks are common, and the possibility of violence is woven into almost every decision an inmate makes. This reputation is the result of multiple factors, including the types of prisoners housed there, the high-pressure environment, gang influences, overcrowding, and the lack of adequate mental health support that exacerbates already unstable conditions. Inside Great Meadow, conflict often ignites without warning. Something as simple as a disagreement over a phone slot, a bump in the hallway, or a comment made in the yard can escalate instantly. In a maximum security facility, the stakes are always high. Many individuals have long sentences with little to lose, increasing the likelihood of aggressive behavior when tension arises. Violence becomes a currency, a way to assert dominance, gain respect, or protect oneself in a world where vulnerability can be dangerous. Those who fail to stand up for themselves may become targets, leading many inmates to adopt an aggressive posture even when they would prefer to avoid conflict. One of the most alarming aspects of Great Meadow's reputation is the prevalence of weaponized assaults. Despite strict searches, metal detectors, and routine cell inspections, inmates continue to craft homemade weapons, shanks, out of sharpened metal, plastic, or even hardened materials from the prison infrastructure. These weapons are hidden with great skill and used suddenly, often with the intent to cause serious harm. A confrontation that starts as a simple argument can shift into a stabbing within seconds. Correctional officers often respond only after the violence has already happened, because many attacks occur swiftly and strategically, catching both staff and inmates off guard. Gangs and organized groups play a significant role in the violent atmosphere. Within Great Meadow, various factions operate beneath the surface, each with their own codes, alliances, and rivalries. These groups may be based on geography, race, or shared criminal backgrounds. While not every inmate belongs to a gang, the influence of these organizations can be felt throughout the facility. Gang leaders sometimes order hits on rivals, enforce discipline on their own members, or retaliate for perceived disrespect. Activities that might seem ordinary in another environment, sitting at the wrong table, talking to the wrong person, entering the wrong housing area, can carry heavy consequences when gang territories and hierarchies are involved. Because of these dynamics, inmates often move through the facility with caution and calculated awareness. Walking through the yard is not a simple stroll. It is a test of observation, reading body language, and knowing where not to go. In the housing units, tensions frequently rise during times when inmates are out of their cells, recreation periods, meal lines, or phone access times. Even small shifts in routine or staff shortages can increase the risk of violence. Lockdowns occur regularly, both to prevent anticipated conflicts and to respond to incidents after they have erupted. Another factor fueling inmate-on-inmate violence is overcrowding. When too many people are confined in a restricted space, stress naturally increases, privacy disappears, and every interaction carries more weight. Overcrowding intensifies competition for limited resources such as phone time, commissary items, showers, and program slots. These small pressures accumulate, and in an environment where aggression is already normalized, disputes can break out rapidly. Overcrowding also reduces the effectiveness of supervision. Fewer officers covering larger groups means less ability to intervene early, making it easier for inmates to carry out planned attacks or ambushes. Mental health challenges add another layer of volatility to Great Meadow's violent reputation. Many individuals house their struggle with untreated or poorly managed psychiatric conditions. When mental instability meets a high-stress, high-pressure environment, the likelihood of unpredictable or explosive behavior increases. Some inmates may lash out violently without warning, driven by paranoia, hallucinations, or emotional dysregulation. Others may be manipulated or provoked into violence by more calculated inmates who use them as tools for retaliation or distraction. The lack of sufficient mental health resources means that many prisoners who need intensive support instead remain in general population, where their conditions can deteriorate and their behaviors become more dangerous. The prison's physical layout and security protocols are designed to minimize violence, but they cannot eliminate it. Even under constant surveillance, blind spots exist. Even with rules in place, moments occur when inmates interact outside the reach of immediate staff intervention. The prison yard, showers, laundry areas, and cell blocks all hold potential risk points where officers cannot be everywhere at once. Inmates understand these patterns better than anyone, and those intent on violence learn how to time their actions around the natural flow of the facility. An additional contributor to the violence is retaliation culture. In Great Meadow, very few incidents remain isolated. A fight between two inmates can turn into a chain reaction, causing factions to mobilize in response. One stabbing can result in multiple assaults days later. Individuals may feel obligated to avenge their friends or associates, even if they personally were not involved in the original conflict. This cycle of retaliation keeps tension high and creates an environment where peace feels temporary and fragile. Many inmates live in a constant state of watchfulness, prepared for conflict not just from personal enemies but from larger disputes they may be connected to indirectly. The combination of these factors, long sentences, gang presence, mental health struggles, overcrowding, retaliation culture, and the constant pressure of survival, makes Great Meadow one of the most violent correctional environments in the state. One of the defining and most troubling characteristics of Great Meadow Correctional Facility is the unusually high number of inmates who struggle with serious mental instability. This includes individuals with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, PTSD, debilitating anxiety, personality disorders, and trauma-related conditions. In a setting already defined by maximum security restrictions, strict routines, and frequent violence, the presence of a large mentally unstable population creates an environment that is unpredictable, dangerous, and deeply challenging for both inmates and staff. Unlike specialized psychiatric institutions designed for treatment, Great Meadow is first and foremost a maximum security prison. Its infrastructure, staffing levels, and daily operations were never intended to function as a large-scale mental health treatment center. Yet over time, due to systemic failures in mental health systems and reductions in community-based psychiatric services, prisons like Great Meadow have become the frontline institutions for individuals who require intensive psychological care. Many of the inmates housed there were already struggling mentally before incarceration, and their conditions often worsen behind bars, where stress, isolation, and the constant threat of violence can rapidly deteriorate their stability. Inside the facility, signs of mental instability are visible in everyday life. Some inmates talk to themselves endlessly, arguing with voices only they can hear. Others pace back and forth in their cells for hours, unable to calm their racing thoughts. Some refuse to leave their cells due to paranoia or anxiety, while others act impulsively, speaking or reacting aggressively without understanding the consequences. For these individuals, the prison environment, loud, chaotic, and strictly controlled, can feel overwhelming, pushing them into cycles of confusion, fear, or agitation. Inmates who are vulnerable mentally often become targets of manipulation or exploitation by more aggressive prisoners, which only deepens their instability. The routines and rules of a maximum security prison pose unique challenges for mentally unstable individuals. Orders must be followed precisely, schedules are rigid, and disobedience, intentional or not, can result in disciplinary action. But someone hearing voices or experiencing a psychotic episode may not process commands clearly. A person in the middle of a panic attack may be unable to line up, move quickly, or interact normally with staff. Someone with severe depression may refuse to leave their bed or attend required programs. Instead of receiving personalized care suited to their mental state, these individuals are often punished for behavior that stems from illness rather than intentional defiance. Disciplinary infractions can lead to solitary confinement, a setting that is known to intensify mental illness. Isolation cells in maximum security prisons are small, bare, and extremely restrictive. For a mentally unstable inmate, being alone in silence for 23 hours a day can lead to rapid deterioration. Symptoms such as hallucinations, anxiety, self-harm tendencies, intense paranoia, and emotional breakdowns frequently worsen in isolation. What was originally meant to control behavior instead becomes a catalyst for psychological crisis. Yet because Great Meadow must prioritize security above all else, officers often have no alternative when dealing with inmates who act unpredictably or aggressively due to their mental conditions. Another issue is access to mental health treatment, which is inconsistent and often inadequate. While Great Meadow employs mental health staff, the sheer number of inmates needing help far outweighs the available resources. Appointments are brief, and therapies that could help stabilize individuals, such as consistent counseling, trauma treatment, and behavioral therapy, are limited or blocked by security restrictions. Medication is available, but it is not always enough to manage conditions on its own, especially when underlying trauma remains unaddressed. Some inmates refuse medication due to paranoia or side effects, while others depend entirely on it yet receive inconsistently due to logistical delays, lockdowns, or shortages. In this environment, even the staff struggle to respond effectively. Correctional officers are trained primarily in security, not in psychiatric crisis management. They must handle situations involving hallucinations, delusions, self-harm attempts, or emotional breakdowns often without specialized support. A mentally unstable inmate who becomes agitated or uncooperative may be perceived as threatening, prompting officers to respond with force or restraints. From a security standpoint, this is often necessary to protect others. But from a mental health standpoint, it can escalate the inmate's distress and reinforce cycles of trauma and instability. The presence of many mentally unstable inmates also contributes to the overall tension inside Great Meadow. Their unpredictable behavior can spark misunderstandings, provoke conflicts, or draw unwanted attention. An inmate experiencing paranoia may think another prisoner is threatening him and lash out, unintentionally initiating a fight. Someone lost in a delusional episode may walk into a gang-controlled area without realizing the risk. A mentally unstable inmate may shout during quiet hours, triggering confrontations with cellmates or neighbors who are already living on edge. Even harmless behaviors like pacing or muttering can irritate others, leading to violent reactions that the mentally unstable inmate is often unable to defend against. The prison environment also reinforces trauma for those who already entered with mental health struggles. Many inmates come from backgrounds marked by abuse, violence, addiction, and neglect. The stress of incarceration, combined with a lack of emotional support, can reopen old wounds or create new psychological scars. Furthermore, witnessing violence, being threatened, or living in a place where danger is constant can aggravate symptoms dramatically. In essence, Great Meadow's mentally unstable population represents a complex intersection of mental illness and high-security confinement. The combination of untreated psychiatric conditions, extreme environmental stressors, limited therapeutic interventions, and the constant presence of violence creates a system where instability not only persists but intensifies. Overcrowding at Great Meadow Correctional Facility is one of the most significant factors that contributes to the constant tension and violent atmosphere inside the prison. When a maximum security facility is forced to house more individuals than it was originally designed for, every aspect of daily life becomes amplified. Pressure, frustration, noise, and conflict all increase. In an environment where nearly every inmate is already dealing with long sentences, psychological stress, or violent histories, overcrowding acts as the spark that can ignite already volatile conditions. When too many prisoners are packed into the same space, the first thing that disappears is personal breathing room. Maximum security prisons already provide very little privacy, but overcrowding reduces even that minimal space. Cells that were originally designed for single occupancy may end up housing 2 or more inmates, forcing individuals with different personalities, habits, mental states, and backgrounds to live shoulder to shoulder. In such cramped quarters, even small irritations, snoring, lack of hygiene, differing sleep schedules, or disagreements over noise, can rapidly escalate into hostility or physical conflict. Tempers flare more easily when there is physically no space to escape from the presence of others. Overcrowding also affects time out of the cell, which becomes a highly competitive resource. Recreation yards, day rooms, phone areas, showers, and dining halls fill up quickly, creating tension as inmates struggle to secure access. In a maximum security environment, where control is strict and movement is limited, Losing access to something as simple as the phone or a shower can trigger anger or retaliation. Lines become longer, wait times increase, and frustration builds. A disagreement over who was next can lead to verbal arguments that spiral into fights or even stabbings. Every routine activity becomes an opportunity for conflict because the environment is stretched beyond its limits. Another major issue is that staffing levels rarely rise to match the increase in population. When the inmate count grows but the number of correctional officers stays the same, or decreases due to shortages, supervision becomes weaker. Fewer officers must oversee larger groups of inmates, which creates blind spots and reduces the ability to intervene quickly when tensions escalate. In a place like Great Meadow, where violence can erupt in seconds, the inability to monitor every area intensifies the sense of danger. Inmates quickly notice when staff are stretched thin, and those with violent intentions may take advantage of these moments to settle disputes, attack rivals, or carry out gang-related orders. Overcrowding also reduces access to programs and rehabilitation services, which are already limited in maximum security facilities. Educational classes, vocational programs, therapy sessions, and rehabilitation workshops all have limited spaces. When the population increases, demand rises but availability does not. Many inmates want these programs, for time out of the cell, for personal improvement, or for gaining credits toward parole or privileges. Being denied access to programs can create resentment and hopelessness, especially for inmates who are trying to change their lives. Without constructive outlets, frustration accumulates, and that emotional pressure often expresses itself through aggression, arguments, or violent outbursts. Mealtimes are another flashpoint. In an overcrowded facility, the dining hall becomes a chaotic environment where hundreds of individuals must be moved, fed, and secured in a short period. Space is tight, lines are long, and the noise level is overwhelming. In this kind of environment, misunderstandings happen easily. Someone cutting in line, bumping into another person, or sitting at the wrong table can instantly escalate into a fight. Staff must move quickly and maintain control, but in an overcrowded dining hall, even a small disturbance can trigger a chain reaction. When tensions are already high, something as simple as a cold meal or a late tray can trigger aggression. The increased noise and constant activity caused by overcrowding contribute to mental strain as well. Maximum security prisons are loud environments to begin with. Metal clanging, people shouting, doors slamming, but overcrowding amplifies this noise significantly. Inmates have fewer quiet moments and less personal space. The constant sensory overload can increase anxiety, irritability, and stress levels, especially for individuals who already struggle with mental or emotional instability. Over time, this can create a climate where arguments and confrontations become the norm rather than the exception. Another consequence of overcrowding is reduced medical and mental health access. Clinics and appointment slots become overloaded, forcing inmates to wait longer for treatment. Someone dealing with untreated pain, chronic illness, or mental health symptoms may become more agitated or aggressive when they cannot access care. Long wait times for medication refills, counseling sessions, or basic health checks can push already vulnerable individuals into crisis. When inmates feel neglected or ignored by the system, their frustration may manifest through violence against others or through self-destructive behavior. Waste management and sanitation also deteriorate under overcrowded conditions. More people mean more trash, more strain on plumbing, and more rapid deterioration of living spaces. When showers are crowded, toilets malfunction, or garbage piles up, tensions escalate. Inmates often feel dehumanized by these conditions, and when people feel dehumanized, aggression rises. Confined in dirty, cramped spaces without relief, individuals may lash out at others simply because the environment offers no comfort or stability. Lastly, overcrowding intensifies the influence of gangs and prison politics. When more inmates are placed together with fewer resources, gangs step in to control access, intimidate others, or enforce their own rules. They may take over phones, tables, shower schedules, or specific areas of the yard. With more people and fewer resources, competition becomes brutal. Weak or isolated inmates become more vulnerable, while those in gangs may become more aggressive in asserting dominance. Overcrowding essentially amplifies every power struggle already present within the prison. In Great Meadow, where violence and instability already exist at high levels, overcrowding acts as an accelerant. Each person added to an already strained environment increases the pressure, reduces available resources, and pushes the facility further toward conflict and chaos. One of the most serious and persistent problems at Great Meadow Correctional Facility is the lack of sufficient mental health services, a gap that becomes painfully clear when compared to the tremendous psychiatric needs of the inmates housed there. In a maximum security prison already filled with individuals struggling with trauma, severe mental illness, emotional instability, and constant stress, the shortage of adequate treatment creates a dangerous environment that affects everyone: prisoners, staff, and the overall safety of the institution. Great Meadow was never designed to function as a psychiatric hospital. It was built with the purpose of containing some of the most violent and high-risk offenders in the state. Yet over the years, due to systemic failures in community mental health infrastructure and reductions in specialized state facilities, prisons like Great Meadow have unintentionally become holding centers for people with serious psychological disorders. As the number of mentally unstable inmates increased, the demand for treatment rose dramatically, but the resources did not grow alongside it. This mismatch leaves mental health units constantly overloaded, understaffed, and unable to meet the needs of the population. Mental health services inside the prison typically include brief evaluations, medication management, crisis intervention, and limited therapy sessions. But these services are stretched thin. A single psychologist or counselor may be responsible for dozens of inmates, each requiring different levels of support. With such a heavy caseload, appointments often become short and infrequent. Instead of ongoing therapy that addresses long-term issues, inmates may receive quick check-ins focused on stabilizing crises rather than preventing them. Many prisoners must wait days or even weeks for appointments, even when their symptoms worsen or they feel themselves losing control. Medication is one of the primary tools for managing psychiatric conditions, but even this system faces complications. In a maximum security environment, medication distribution is tightly controlled and time-sensitive. Lockdowns, staff shortages, or security incidents can delay or interrupt medication rounds, leaving inmates without essential psychiatric drugs. Missing even a few doses can cause severe mood swings, increased paranoia, anxiety, or psychotic symptoms. Some inmates become unstable when their medication schedule is disrupted, leading to conflicts, aggression, or self-harm. And for inmates who rely heavily on medication to function, inconsistency becomes more than an inconvenience. It becomes a serious safety risk. Another issue is that not all inmates trust the system enough to seek help. Many prisoners fear being labeled mentally ill because it can make them targets for bullying or exploitation. Others believe that mental health staff are aligned with correctional officers and worry that revealing their vulnerabilities will be used against them. This cultural barrier prevents countless inmates from receiving treatment they desperately need. Instead of turning to therapy or medication, they attempt to manage their symptoms on their own, often through unhealthy coping mechanisms like aggression, withdrawal, or substance abuse when contraband becomes available. The limitations in mental health services also mean that crisis management becomes reactive rather than preventative. Staff are often forced to intervene only after an inmate has already reached a breaking point, after a violent outburst, a suicide attempt, or a psychotic episode. Without the time or resources for consistent therapeutic intervention, psychological care becomes a cycle of emergencies rather than a structured plan for stabilization and improvement. In many cases, the only response available during a crisis is to place the inmate in an observation cell or solitary confinement, environments that can further worsen their mental state. Solitary confinement is particularly harmful for inmates with psychiatric conditions. The near-total isolation, sensory deprivation, and lack of human contact can intensify symptoms of mental illness dramatically. Inmates experiencing hallucinations may become consumed by their delusions. Those with depression may fall deeper into hopelessness. Individuals with anxiety or trauma histories may experience severe panic or dissociation. Instead of receiving treatment that promotes stabilization, they endure conditions that often cause long-term psychological damage. Despite widespread recognition of these effects, maximum security prisons frequently rely on isolation simply because they lack more appropriate alternatives. Another major barrier to mental health care at Great Meadow is insufficient communication between medical staff and correctional officers. Officers are the ones who observe daily behavior, but they are not trained mental health professionals. When they witness an inmate acting strangely, they may interpret the behavior as defiance rather than a symptom of psychiatric distress. This misunderstanding can lead to unnecessary disciplinary actions, which further aggravate the inmate's condition. Effective treatment requires collaboration, but without adequate training and clear communication systems, officers often feel unprepared to identify or manage mental health issues appropriately. Resources for long-term rehabilitation or trauma counseling are almost non-existent. Many inmates carry deep wounds from childhood abuse, domestic violence, addiction, homelessness, or previous prison experiences. Without therapy programs designed to address trauma, they continue to live in survival mode, hypervigilant and emotionally unstable. Prison itself becomes another traumatic layer, reinforcing negative patterns and making healing harder. When individuals leave Great Meadow after years or decades without treatment, they often re-enter society more unstable than when they arrived, perpetuating cycles of violence and incarceration. Even when mental health professionals try their best to help, they face structural limits. Space for confidential sessions is minimal. Security interruptions are constant. Program cancellations due to lockdowns are routine. Inmates who are finally scheduled for therapy may lose their session because of an unrelated fight elsewhere in the facility. The entire system is reactive, strained, and constantly under pressure. The result is a population of men who are struggling emotionally and psychologically with nowhere near enough support. The lack of sufficient mental health services does not only affect the inmates who suffer silently, it affects every person inside Great Meadow. It increases the risk of violence, destabilizes cell blocks, strains officers, and contributes to the overall climate of unpredictability and fear. The impact of Great Meadow Correctional Facility's harsh environment on correctional staff is profound, often overlooked, and central to understanding why the institution operates with such persistent tension. While inmates face danger from overcrowding, mental instability, and violence, correctional officers and other staff members confront these same threats daily, yet with the added responsibility of maintaining control, enforcing order, and ensuring safety in a setting where almost nothing is predictable. Their job is not just physically demanding. It takes an intense psychological toll that accumulates over years, shaping their health, their relationships, and their view of the world. Correctional officers at Great Meadow work in an environment defined by constant vigilance. Every shift begins with the knowledge that something could go wrong without warning. A fight in the yard, a stabbing in a hallway, a mental health crisis turning violent, or a coordinated gang attack. Officers must remain alert from the moment they walk through the guarded gates until the moment they leave. This hypervigilance, repeated day after day, alters the nervous system. Officers often describe working in a maximum security prison as existing in a state of permanent tension, a readiness to react instantly to danger, even when the immediate threat is not visible. This psychological strain is intensified by chronic understaffing, a problem that plagues many high-security prisons and is particularly severe in facilities like Great Meadow. When the inmate population rises but the number of officers does not, the pressure on staff increases drastically. Officers must cover more ground, supervise more inmates, and respond to more incidents than the job realistically allows. This creates a dangerous imbalance. Too many prisoners, not enough staff, and a constant battle to maintain order. Understaffed shifts mean fewer eyes watching high-risk areas, which increases the burden on officers present and heightens the probability that they will be caught in dangerous situations. The emotional weight carried by correctional staff is compounded by the knowledge that many inmates harbor hostility toward authority. In a place like Great Meadow where violence is common, officers often become targets, not necessarily because of who they are, but because of the uniform they wear. Officers face verbal abuse, threats, intimidation, and in some cases physical assaults. Even when incidents do not escalate to physical violence, the daily barrage of disrespect and tension erodes emotional resilience. Staff learn quickly that showing fear can invite aggression, but responding too harshly can escalate conflict. Balancing authority with restraint becomes a constant psychological negotiation. Another challenge is dealing with mentally unstable inmates, whose actions may be unpredictable, aggressive, or self-destructive. Correctional officers are not mental health professionals, yet they frequently become the first responders to psychiatric crises. They may be called to intervene when an inmate is harming himself, experiencing hallucinations, or refusing to follow orders due to paranoia or confusion. These interactions can be dangerous, because officers must protect themselves and others while attempting to de-escalate someone who may not understand commands or perceive reality clearly. Without specialized training, officers are often left improvising responses in high-stress situations where a wrong move can lead to violence, injury, or disciplinary issues. The emotional burden of this work does not disappear when officers leave the prison. Many carry the stresses of the job home with them. The constant exposure to conflict, trauma, and danger can lead to anxiety, depression, sleep problems, and difficulty relaxing even during off hours. Officers may become emotionally detached or hyper-alert in their personal lives, a phenomenon known as spillover stress. Relationships with spouses, children, and friends can suffer because it becomes difficult to transition between prison mode and family mode. The psychological armor required to work in a place like Great Meadow does not easily come off at the end of a shift. One of the most overlooked impacts on staff is the cumulative trauma associated with witnessing violence. Officers at Great Meadow may see inmates injured, bleeding, or dying. They may respond to suicides or serious assaults. They may find themselves breaking up fights where weapons are involved. Over time, repeated exposure to such events creates a form of secondary trauma, similar to what first responders encounter. This trauma often goes unaddressed because correctional culture encourages toughness and discourages vulnerability. Officers are expected to handle extreme situations without showing emotional weakness, leaving many to cope alone. The institutional culture can also create a sense of isolation for staff. Correctional officers occupy a unique role, neither prisoners nor part of the outside community. This can create a disconnect between the dangers they face and the public's understanding of their work. Outside the prison, few people fully grasp the intensity of their daily responsibilities. Inside the prison, officers must remain firm, composed, and authoritative. This dual existence can be mentally exhausting. When officers feel unsupported or misunderstood, their stress increases and the risk of burnout rises. Physical health is impacted as well. Long shifts, mandatory overtime, irregular schedules, and constant stress contribute to high rates of hypertension, heart disease, and chronic fatigue among correctional staff. Sleep is often disrupted because officers work odd hours or struggle to unwind after intense shifts. The body remains in a heightened state of alert even when rest is needed, gradually wearing down the immune system and overall health. Another complicating factor is the lack of adequate resources and support systems for staff. Access to mental health counseling exists in some form, but officers often do not use it due to stigma, fear of judgment, or concerns about confidentiality. Training for handling psychiatric crises may be limited. Staff may feel the administration is disconnected from the realities on the ground. When officers perceive that they lack backup, whether physical or emotional, the job becomes even more draining. Additionally, the tension between officers and inmates can sometimes escalate due to institutional policies that change frequently or seem unrealistic under overcrowded and violent circumstances. Officers may feel caught between enforcing strict rules and managing human behavior in conditions that do not allow for flexibility. This internal conflict can lead to frustration and contribute to a sense of professional helplessness. In a place like Great Meadow, where danger, instability, and unpredictability shape daily operations, correctional staff bear the weight of maintaining order in a system where safety is never guaranteed. Great Meadow Correctional Facility forces us to confront a difficult and often uncomfortable truth about the American justice system. Is the purpose of prison to punish, to protect, or to rehabilitate? On paper, the answer is usually a combination of all three. But inside institutions like Great Meadow, the reality tells a very different story, one that reveals the fractured structure of our correctional philosophy and exposes the systemic flaws that ripple far beyond prison walls. At its core, Great Meadow is a maximum security facility housing individuals convicted of serious crimes, many of whom struggle with profound mental health issues. But the conditions inside, limited treatment, overcrowding, constant tension, and frequent violence, raise fundamental questions about whether rehabilitation is even possible in such an environment. In many ways, Great Meadow has become a symbol of a much larger national dilemma. How do we expect people to return to society healthier, safer, or more stable when the environment we place them in is chaotic, volatile, and devoid of meaningful support? To understand this, we must first look at what rehabilitation requires. Research consistently shows that individuals change not in environments of fear, but in environments of structure, support, consistency, and access to resources. Therapy, education, vocational training, meaningful human interaction, and stable routines are the pillars of rehabilitation. Yet Great Meadow struggles to provide even basic mental health care, let alone the structured and supportive environment necessary for personal growth. When inmates spend years surrounded by aggression, uncertainty, and a lack of emotional stability, it's not rehabilitation that takes place, it's survival conditioning. This leads to a larger ethical question. If survival becomes the primary mode of life inside prison, what behavior patterns are people learning? Violence becomes currency. Hypervigilance becomes habit. Trust becomes dangerous. Vulnerability becomes a liability. The very traits needed for reintegration into society, emotional regulation, impulse control, communication skills, are suppressed or punished in the prison culture. When a system consistently reinforces behaviors that work against rehabilitation, it must be asked whether the system is truly designed to reform or simply to contain and control. The impact doesn't end with the inmates. Correctional officers also suffer under the weight of this broken structure. When staff operate in a high-stress, violent environment day after day, they develop their own forms of trauma, hypervigilance, and burnout. This affects their interactions with inmates, often making them more reactive, less patient, and less willing to engage in rehabilitative efforts. A toxic environment breeds more toxicity, spreading tension across every level of the institution. When both inmates and staff feel unsafe, unsupported, or overwhelmed, the system itself becomes an unstable ecosystem that cannot function as intended. Great Meadow also brings attention to the moral responsibility of a society that incarcerates people with mental illness at extraordinarily high rates. If a facility houses a large number of mentally unstable individuals but lacks adequate treatment options, we are forced to question whether prisons have become default psychiatric hospitals, without the training, resources, or structure necessary to actually treat mental illness. What does it say about a society when the place most mentally ill people end up is not a hospital, not a clinic, not a community support program, but a maximum security prison with razor wire and concrete cells? Beyond morality, the economic implications are equally troubling. Housing an inmate in a maximum security prison is significantly more expensive than providing mental health treatment, substance abuse programs, education, or community-based rehabilitation services. Yet we continue to invest in the most costly, least effective method: long-term incarceration in environments that encourage violence rather than change. This raises policy questions about priorities, resource allocation, and whether the current system is truly built to reduce crime, or simply to manage it after the fact. Another crucial question is about public safety. The majority of incarcerated individuals, even those in maximum security facilities, will eventually return to society. If Great Meadow conditions worsen mental health issues, heighten aggression, and strip individuals of coping skills, what kind of citizens are being reintroduced into communities? Are we creating safer neighborhoods, or are we unintentionally manufacturing cycles of reoffending? Rehabilitation isn't just an inmate issue, it's a public safety strategy. When prisons fail to rehabilitate, society bears the long-term consequences. There is also a question of human dignity. Regardless of one's crimes, the ability to access mental health care, safety, and basic human respect is part of ethical governance. A system that treats inmates as less than human does not reflect justice. It reflects dysfunction. A society reveals its values not only in how it treats its best citizens, but in how it treats its most troubled and most dangerous. Great Meadow exposes the contradiction between the ideal of justice and the reality of neglect. Ultimately, the broader question posed by Great Meadow is not just about one prison, it is about the identity of an entire correctional philosophy. Are we building people up or breaking them down? Are we addressing root causes or simply locking symptoms behind steel doors? Are we preparing individuals for reintegration or guaranteeing their return to a system that profits from their failure? Great Meadow stands as a stark mirror held up to the justice system, reflecting its fractures, contradictions, and unresolved moral dilemmas. It forces us to confront whether we are truly committed to rehabilitation, or whether we have accepted a cycle of violence, instability, and neglect as the cost of doing business.